change my love the way that you do.
This is the story of a lost neighborhood and of its people who did not want to go.
I don't want no money. I want my home. The old man is old. See how the old man is old? And I'm old. That's enough. I don't want to get out. I said to my two daughters, they don't want to get out too because they spend a lot of money. Plenty of money they spend in this place. We not get none to nobody. Never.
Hi, welcome to the West End Video Newsletter. Tonight we're going to do a show, I guess it's with Ed Flynn, who's Ray Flynn's son. He reads our newsletter and he comes to our Mass for deceased West Enders at St. Joseph's, and I really appreciate it. And the last time, he was there last 2 Sundays ago when we had it, and I realized that it's like the same way I could go to Southie and mingle in there fairly easy, because the Southie was a neighborhood, and it is a good neighborhood, of working class people, and the same is true. He can come over to us, and even though we'll say the core of what the neighborhood that we lived in is different in some ways, those type of neighborhoods in the old days, people could relate to each other, and I don't think that's true anymore. I think the neighborhoods in Boston have become gentrified, and that real neighborhoods are on their way out. And that being said, I'd like to introduce Ed Flynn.
Thank you, Jim. It's good to be with you. And that's right, I do read the newsletter every time it comes out. I thank you for sending that to me, and it's always great reading. I like to catch up on, some of the old. I love looking at the old pictures and the stories. But as I said, I saw you recently at the, as you said, at the St. Joseph's annual Mass for the deceased West Enders. It was a great event, and it was a good opportunity. I didn't go down to the reception after, but I stood out front.
You have in the past.
I have in the past, and but after Mass, I stood out front and was talking to some of the old folks there, and old West Enders and their families. Yeah. And we were talking about. I was talking about my neighborhood. They were talking about their neighborhood. But what was striking to me is the love they still have for their old neighborhood. Many years have gone past, but they still love their old neighborhood. They love the family atmosphere of the West End, and the traditions, the strong values of a great neighborhood, a proud community. And it's always great to be with you and the other West Enders. Right.
You did your thesis too, if I believe, on the West End. I remember you calling me up then.
That's right. I had the opportunity to talk to you and interview you. We were right out in front of the Charles River Park there.
That's right.
And we did a little video work, and that was part of my documentary. I was on the old West End, and I guess my point of my thesis was, here you had a great, proud, diverse American neighborhood, and it was under urban renewal, under progress, according to the city of Boston. They basically kicked people out and tore down a proud neighborhood, and brought in a wealthier people.
Well, the original plan wasn't that way. The original plan was going to be so many, it was supposed to be like some renovation, and parts that couldn't be renovated. And it's funny because the city took over, and a guy that was the city solicitor in 1954 became the developer, Jerome Rappaport, which, he claims he did everybody a favor because nobody wanted to build it,
Right. But, and they took the land eminent domain, which basically a governmental agency can take from a private organization or private dwellings and take it for the greater use of the public. Well, I disagree with that type of law, especially the way it was enforced. That was a great neighborhood. It was diverse. People were happy there. And like all of us, it was, there was some good times and some bad times, but everyone stuck together. But for the city of Boston and these wealthy developers to do that to this neighborhood is unconscionable.
Well, part of the reason they picked the West End is they originally did the New York streets. Now, the New York streets are down by, Albany, and there were streets named after New York cities. And they tore down, I think 20 or 25 acres. It's where the Boston Herald is today. And I have it back in the museum. Somebody gave me a speech that Mayor Hines gave at that time, 1954, stating that there were going to be offices and retail. It was going to be this beautiful.
Right.
Nobody wanted to build it because the South End in those days. Now it's different. You can't buy one of those houses for $2.5 million.
Right.
But in those days, nobody wanted to live in the South End. They felt
Right.
that the South End was run down and this, that, and the other thing. So nobody wanted to build it. And the Herald not the Herald Tribune, the Herald Traveler was the only one that would build there, and they built a paper plant. So now they went around looking for an area in a good location. And the area in the good location was the West End, on the foot of Beacon Hill, right on the river. It's funny because they didn't tear down the older section of the West End, Hill Street, and over, next to Bowdoin Square and Scully Square.
Right.
They tore down 50 acres that were on the river first. So
In the area where the Mass General Hospital is.
Right.
And the Charles River.
Right, it was surrounded by.
Development there.
It was right on the river, coming around, bounded by North Station. Which, by the way, North Station is not in the North End. Everybody thinks North Station.
Right.
It's North Station, South Station. It's north of South Station,
Right.
or south,
Right.
whatever. It was actually in the West End, which is, sounds funny because of the way the name runs. But North Station was on this side. Matter of fact, when we were kids, we used to go and make forts out of the lobster. They used to have lobster crates. Would make, and some of the older guys used to go out there when they still had coal stoves and everything, and pick up coal on the tracks and bring them home. During the Depression and everything.
Right.
We got all those stories. But that was, the only part that we were bounded by, up around Myrtle Street on the hill. That's about the boundary, because from Myrtle Street down, that was always considered the West End. Anything on Myrtle Street over, that was considered the South Slope, and that was Boston Brahmin.
Right. Right.
And you basically couldn't go there. I mean, it was just, if they seen urchins like us around, they would,
Right.
police officers would be coming around. What are you doing around? They talk about profiling.
Right.
Profiling is not new.
Right.
If you look like you don't belong in a neighborhood, right? There was a tendency for police to come down and question you, and that's always been the way. But now it's different, I guess. Everything has changed.
Right. I always enjoyed reading the different, newspaper columns. Sometimes Alan Lupo would write an article.
Yeah.
Peter Galzinas in the Herald
Right.
would write an article. But writing those articles and the work you're doing, I know you're teaching, once in a while you teach a course at MIT.
Yeah, I give a talk at MIT, yeah.
To the young developers there. And, I could only imagine their reaction is, here you had a neighborhood,
Right.
a diverse neighborhood, and you had the powerful organizations, the city, the BRA, basically come in and,
Right.
give the people a lot of BS,
Yeah.
and then throw them out and tear down their homes. And, it's a good example of, city planners, young people
Yeah.
that want to get involved in government or development, of how not to destroy a neighborhood,
Yeah.
how not to,
Exactly.
tear down a neighborhood and cause havoc in people's lives. So it's, it's a great, unfortunately, it's a great lesson that hopefully many people can learn, although I don't know if we still have learned the lesson.
We have to some extent, okay? After the West End, they never did urban renewal and eminent domain in Massachusetts the same way they did before. There's this group called the Institute for Justice, and they're fighting. As a matter of fact, it's been in the paper that they're going all the way to the Supreme Court with the New London families. The families in New London, they're taking their land for Pfizer, and they're fighting them all the way up to the Supreme Court. Now they're fighting them, and they've won in a lot of cases. I'll tell you, it's funny because we were down in the museum before. Last July, and we were there, and some people came in from Michigan, and they were talking about Pole Town. It was an area of Detroit that they tore down that they were going to give to General Motors, and then General Motors decided that they didn't want to build there anymore, and it was leveled, and it's been there for the last 20 or so years. 2 days later, I get home, and I go onto my computer, and I get a thing from the Institute for Justice saying that the Michigan Supreme Court has ruled that was illegal for that taking. Now, nice to tell you it's illegal 25 years later.
Right, exactly.
All those people got pushed out and shoved out.
But you don't see the physical, tearing down of neighborhoods anymore. What you see is the neighborhoods becoming, gentrified and unaffordable for working class families, for the elderly, especially the elderly or veterans. You know, where is the housing? Where are the neighborhoods for the elderly, working families, or veterans even? And you don't see it anymore, and it's too bad. We have housing for the wealthy. They certainly can live wherever they want to. I think they need to build affordable housing for working families can afford to live there. I mean, if you lived in Somerville or Charlestown or Hyde Park or South Boston, any neighborhood, and you were married there and had your family and your kids went to school there, you'd want your child to be able to afford to live in that neighborhood. Unfortunately, that's not the case anymore in probably most neighborhoods in Boston. In Boston, from South Boston to Roxbury and West Roxbury. And
well, it's funny. West Roxbury and Hyde Park and all those places used to be the big money parts of the city. Okay, we'll say the suburban parts of the city where they had they were more expensive than the inner city. Okay, and now it's becoming just the opposite.
Right.
The inner city, like they're putting up all these condos and all these apartments, and they're going totally the other way. You're talking about condos at $450,000 and so forth.
Right.
It's getting very expensive to live there. And not only that, they're like I say, they no longer are they neighborhoods. Now they're people think a neighborhood is you come out and you say hello to your neighbor, you say good morning, and that's what a neighborhood is, you know.
Right.
But they don't realize that being a neighborhood is a lot more than that.
Right.
A lot more than that. Being a neighborhood is helping out.
Yeah, it's the community. It's the sports programs. It's your church. I mean, I'm seeing it in South Boston. My church is just closed. St. Augustine's. It's actually closing October 31st. And for over 100 years, it's kind of been the bedrock of the cornerstone of South Boston. We're literally surrounded by 3 public housing developments, a lot of elderly, a lot of poor and working class families. And, unfortunately, this great institution, St. Augustine's, this great church that has done so much for, those in need is not going to be there anymore. So, I mean, we see it gradually in South Boston. And, sometimes you could wait for the bus on a Monday morning for work, 7 o'clock, and you wouldn't know if, 2 people waiting for the bus. South Boston has changed that much.
I can believe that. I can believe that. It's probably going to change more too. And we had Tom McDonald, who's an administrator over at St. Catherine's of Siena. Now they do great things over there. The church has plenty of money. I can't help thinking about some of these church closings that the Archdiocese. I have one problem with all this. They're talking that it's maintenance and everything. If they're going to close them and take the money, like some of them have $100,000, $200,000 in bank accounts, give it to the next closest church.
Right.
Okay? That way you'll save them from the maintenance costs and everything. If that's what you're going to do it that way. Don't send it all up. Okay? Spread it out.
Right.
And if that's the reasons you're giving, unless you just want to say, no, we're just, we have extreme costs and we have to go. But I can't believe that. I would just rather see, like all these churches and everything, cultural icons. People put things in there for their mother and their father, pews and everything. And then they go, and where are they going?
Right.
It's gone. They thought they'd be there forever.
Yeah. Well, we're seeing that, all over Boston, you're seeing the schools closed, the Catholic schools closed.
True.
Several in Dorchester, Mount Senior Ryan, Christopher Columbus, and
it's been gone for a while, yeah.
And I went to school at Don Bosco in Chinatown, and now it's partly a hotel.
Yeah, that's right.
And St. Peter and Paul Catholic Church on Broadway in South Boston is now luxury condos. So, especially a lot of these schools. You had a school like Mount Senior Ryan Memorial. Girls from Dorchester, South Boston, girls from Roxbury, all walk there, and they got a good education, good Catholic education. But unfortunately, we don't have the people, fighting for those types of schools anymore.
My kids went to Matignon, and Matignon's staying open, but it's staying open as a private school.
Right.
Because the Catholic Church or the Archdiocese no longer says they can no longer afford these schools, so they have to go on their own. I guess we're in a changing world, and
right.
I don't really like to say too much about the Archdiocese. I've had problems with the Archdiocese before. There are some priests that get a little too... I guess I sent a letter to the head of BC. He's starting a group called the Church in the 21st Century about year and a half ago. I think his name was Monnerin or something. I don't remember exactly who it was. But I sent him a letter and I said, Dear Reverend, and I said, I address you as Reverend because I consider that's your most important job.
Right, right, right. Well, that's a great point.
You know what I mean? Too many of these priests, their secular duties become to them more important than the religious duties. Okay?
Right.
And it shouldn't be that way.
Yeah.
Okay? And when you do something with a priest or somebody on the archdiocese, they're the ones that are supposed to turn the other cheek. They're the ones that are supposed to do all that stuff. And sometimes you don't get that.
Right.
You get exactly the opposite. And I think if that, like a lot of these people with the church closings, they've felt that they're getting their faces slapped and everything. I don't know if we're going to get a lot of those people back again. Now, it may work out because a lot of those people disappear and then the kids maybe will start coming out. But I think they're making major mistakes by doing what they're doing.
In the Catholic Church, and especially in Boston, it has always been there for immigrants, for poor people, for the needy, for the elderly. And, you know, by and large, the majority of priests are good priests.
Oh, and the neighborhood priests? Yeah, I have nothing
They're great people, and they've done a great job, but it's too bad that we have to, you know, the bad example of a few priests have hurt the Catholic Church greatly.
Father Troy at St. Joseph's, I mean, a great guy. He's really a great guy.
Right.
And Father Buck before him was a great guy. I have nothing but great words for them. But that's what happens sometimes. Like I say, sometimes priests, they think their secular job becomes more important than their religious. And getting back to neighborhoods, you know, when you're living in a neighborhood like Southie or the West End, it's not saying hello to your neighbor. It's being a small part of the whole. Okay, you're a small part. You're an integral part of this wheel. Like, okay, that everything is in. Not being an individual unit in the middle of something. You know what I mean?
Right. Exactly.
You're part of the whole thing, and that goes into like when we were kids, we used to go down to the park and play softball, and you know, all the neighbors would go down and play softball. Everybody would go down and watch them. You know, all the different, you know, football teams, you know that. And I'm not talking about high school games. I'm talking about everybody had park league or, you know, baseball. And if, you know, there was like 10 different park leagues, if I remember, in football. Anywhere from, you know, so-so league to all the way up to the big park league, right? And everybody would go support them. Everybody felt that it was part of them. I think, what's his name? Mark Freed said it the best in his book, The World of the Urban Working Class, which he wrote about the West End. He said, although a lot of people in the West End didn't own their houses, they felt the West End belonged to them.
That's right.
You know what I mean?
Right. Well, I think a lot of people could identify with those people living in the West End or those people that have lived in the West End. You know, it was a great neighborhood, a great community. And it was diverse.
Right. Oh,
it was dozens.
24 different nationalities and ethnic groups. Yeah.
And
blacks. We have
blacks and Irish and
there wasn't
Jewish community that was there.
Yeah.
And, Albanians,
Greeks. My mother was Lithuanian. I'm Italian and Lithuanian.
Right.
There's a whole host of.
Media, you know, always talked about, you know, we need diverse neighborhoods.
Yeah.
And we do need diverse neighborhoods. But we had it here in the West End. It was a diverse, it was a working class, you know, neighborhood that made, I think, it made Boston a better city, and it, you know, gave a lot to the city, the pride of Boston, and you know, it's great that people like you continue to spread the word of what happened in the West End, and hopefully that lesson will never be repeated
Well, that's
again.
what Al Lupo said. And it said, you guys, the city owes you guys a debt of gratitude. We had him on the show once. He said, the city owes you guys a debt of gratitude because when you left the West End, you told everybody what was happening, and it didn't happen that same way. And like I said this at the beginning of the show, there's this group, Institute for Justice. I went to a symposium with them, and it doesn't happen that way in Massachusetts, but all across the country, they're still doing a lot of these crazy things. There's a thing called quick take. They take your property for $1, and somewhere down the line, they pay you. Now, if you can't afford to move, if you're house poor, you have to pay rent to whoever if we're, like, say, in Boston, you have to pay rent to the Boston Redevelopment Authority, or if it's in New York, whatever the New York redevelopment, you have to pay rent to them till they pay you and you can get out. And in effect, you're subsidizing the taking your own house.
Right. It's unfair to do that to people, and you know, it's too bad, but thankfully, I don't want to repeat myself,
Yeah.
but, you know, the lesson you're teaching us here and we're talking about, and hopefully people that are watching the program at their homes, wherever they may be,
Yeah.
is that they can also get involved in their neighborhood and make sure that they speak out on
Yeah.
issues, on housing issues. And if they see something in their neighborhood that they don't like, they should speak up and do something about it.
Yeah, and they should get closer to their neighbors too. See, unfortunately, a lot of people nowadays, it's like I say, the individual units rather than a piece of the whole. And you know, in Southie, I mean, everybody, you know the way it is.
Right.
It's just that way. You have that feeling, you know, that feeling for everybody. You feel like they're part of your family. Okay, it's not just like, oh, he's my neighbor.
Right.
You know?
The other piece that I wanted to mention,
Sure.
you know, the building, they say they're building affordable housing, but what they'll do is developers will build, you know, 30, 40 units of housing at the market rate,
Right.
and have 2 or 3 units affordable.
Right.
And the 2 or 3 units may be $300,000 or $350,000, and the market rate is, you know, $500 or $600.
Yeah.
So of 40 units, you have 2 or 3 that people can afford or can afford. But it's you know, it's unfair, some of these housing laws that, you know, hurt working families, the elderly. You know, we need more housing for the elderly, for veterans, and for families, and hopefully we can you know, we can continue doing that. We haven't seen much of it here in Boston, but you know, in other areas we probably have seen it more so.
They have a 10% inclusionary rule that whatever you build, you have to put 10 units. Now in Boston, what they've been doing though is allowing the developers. They don't have to put it into the, like say they're going to do in Southie. They don't really have to do it in Southie. They can put it like somewhere other part of the city. So in effect, while it's good and it does get affordable housing built, if they were doing it in Southie, those houses, you're not going to have housing for Southie people.
Right. People are certainly priced out. And I think you probably, if you were a married couple, need to make $125,000 a year to be able to afford to live in South Boston.
Well, especially around the waterfront.
Yeah. So it's out of reach for you know, regular people, for seniors and for elderly. And
Yeah, probably most of Southie people probably end up in going down like to Quincy and Billerica.
there's a lot of Southie people that move to Quincy and Braintree,
Yeah, going down that
Weymouth,
way.
South Shore.
Because it's a natural progression.
Yeah.
Because if they can't live in Southie, especially around the ocean. I understand one of those. A developer took one of those old houses, you know, the mansion types, and turned it into like apartments, and he's getting like $3,500 a month for one apartment. I mean, it just, you know, the figures, especially on the water, anything.
Yeah,
on
probably
the
the
way
Columbia Road section of the Farragut Road in South Boston, right in the ocean, a beautiful area there.
A lot of that's happening. It's happening, like I say, it happened here in Davis Square too. That's if I didn't own my own house, I probably wouldn't be able to live in some of them.
Right.
It's just changed. When I moved into Davis Square, it was a blue-collar, working-class neighborhood. Now it's all professionals. I have a doctor on the second floor.
So they kept moving further and further
Right.
out.
And I know a lot of people from Davis Square were moving up to Lowell because they could buy or rent up there relatively cheap.
Yeah.
And
My wife is from Lowell.
is that right?
Yeah, her family's from Lowell, and they moved to Tewksbury after that. But some great neighborhoods up in Lowell. I like that area up there.
Well, I was up there at one of the conventions and looking around, and I haven't been up there for years. And they've really done they've done a lot of renovating and in the town and everything. It looks pretty good.
Yeah, Lowell and the other city, Lawrence, is doing well also.
Is that right?
They had the mills up there, of
Right.
course. A lot of people now have homes inside the mills, condos or
right.
townhouses, and you know the city is coming
Improving,
back.
yeah.
It's improving, and there's a lot of great people up there.
Well, I guess that's anywhere in the city. See, it's slowly becoming. If you live in the city, it's more convenient. See, people are before they wanted to get away and get into their own plot of land and everything. Now they realize that you can go into the city and you don't have to do your lawn, do all this, especially when you get older. There's a lot of people as they get older, they come back to the city.
Right.
Because they don't want to put up with all the foolishness of what the suburbs. You know. You have to travel and everything.
Right.
Which is nice, but on the other hand, it's not the city I knew anymore. It's,
Right. I've noticed a lot of changes. Some good,
Some
some
bad,
bad.
yeah.
But you know, as the other example we were talking about earlier, you know, your neighborhood has made an enormous contribution to our country. A lot of
you're right.
patriotic West Enders fought in
Fought and
all
died.
of our wars and,
Yeah.
and died. And your brother was a patriotic American, and he died in
My
Italy.
brother graduated from Commerce High School in 1940, and he was dead in '44.
Mm-hmm.
It was like, you know, but he wasn't the only one. A lot of kids, you
Yeah.
know, a lot of people don't realize what
World
that
War II.
World War II is
Yeah.
like. I mean, we lost a hell of a lot of people
Right.
in that war. Of course, we stopped, whatever you want to say, that we stopped Germany and Japan and everything.
Yeah.
And, you know,
Was the sacrifice of kids in the West End and South Boston and Roxbury and Dorchester and, you know,
Right.
Hyde Park that made this a great country. I'm always proud of the fact that South Boston was the first neighborhood community to build a private monument for Vietnam veterans that died from our town. And recently the traveling wall came to South Boston.
Oh, did it? Yeah.
And it was a great event.
Yeah, well, Southie always prided itself on, and the West End to a large extent.
Right.
You know, always prided themselves on, you know, so you would fight for your family. So
Right.
this is the way it is.
Yeah.
See, what these people don't realize, it was your family first, your corner, right, your friends, your
Yeah.
corner,
Yeah.
your neighborhood, right, like, you know, the Southie, the West End,
Yeah.
your city, your state. There was like, and you did it because it was expected of you.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it was totally changed. Now it's like everybody's on their own and nobody cares, and it's I don't know. It's not the same.
Right. Well, it's going to be great sometime when the library and museum opens. I know it's
open, but
now,
only on a very
Yeah.
peripheral. You know.
But for people that may not know much about the West End, that just probably happen to be watching this program, it'd probably be a great event or a great thing for them to spend a couple hours, take their family, and
Right.
read some of the old newspaper articles and watch the. I like watching looking at the old pictures.
Right.
And it's a great way to spend an afternoon.
Well, we have to tie up now. We're coming to the end of the show. And is there anything else you'd like to say?
No, I just want to thank you. I always enjoy being with you and
Right.
the folks from the old West End neighborhood. I saw many of them at the Mass
yeah.
last week at St. Joseph's, and you know, you all are great people and made Boston a great city, but more importantly, made the United States a better country.
Well, one thing I always liked, your father was always behind us, and he wasn't a West Ender, and he didn't have to be. And for that, see, that's another thing. A lot of these neighbors, loyalty doesn't mean anything. But I still, whatever your father did for us, I still appreciate.
Yeah, thank you.
And that's the way I feel.
Yeah, well, he always loved the West End and loved the people.
Yeah, he keeps
especially.
talking about having to run out of the West End house, right?
Right, he was
because-
playing basketball there with all the
and I keep
with all the
telling him,
kids.
I know a lot of people that said they had to run out of the.
Out of the Salty Boys Club. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, anyways, I guess I'll see you at the next West End video newsletter.
See you soon, Jim.
Take care.
Thank you.